Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Growing Up with Godzilla. My name is Donny Winter, and this is my show where I have conversations with Godzilla fans about how they've grown with the character and franchise over time. We are in the middle of season three. Actually, we're nearing the end of season three, which is still very surreal to me, but here we are. I've had many familiar faces returning, and I've had some new faces making appearances as well. And the person that I have joining me today is quite possibly one of my favorite human beings. We actually got to meet at G Fest this year. I would like to welcome the co host of the Kaiju Kingdom Podcast, who also happens to be an international comics historian, the ever so wonderful Jessica Tseang. Hello.
Hi, Donny. Thank you for asking me to come on your show. I'm so excited.
I have been nerding out about having you on the show for quite some time, and I think meeting at G Fest kind of like really amped that excitement because our conversations were wholesome. I watched some of the wonderful things that you were doing there, and I think that you create such a strong sense of community in our fandom, and that should be celebrated.
Oh, thank you. I try. I always feel like I could be doing better, but I only have so much time and energy in a day. But I'm
Absolutely.
trying.
No, I think you do great, but I'm very similar in the sense that bandwidth considering we have to do what we can,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think I think we may have crossed paths at prior G Fests before, but I don't think we super knew each other until
Really.
this year.
Okay.
And how many G Fests have you been to?
I have been to a lot. I can't remember. With the exception of 1 year, I had a family emergency, so I was not able to go. But I would say maybe the last 10 years or more, but I
Nice.
wasn't always involved in the panels and programming in like a professional capacity.
Mm-hmm.
I have been going when I was younger, but I'm also small in stature, so I can bob and weave as an attendee and a fan before then, but
Mm-hmm.
really in a much more like official capacity, I would say maybe 10 years. This also accounts for the years that we had stay at home and then we didn't have the actual convention. I would
Right.
say, sequential years, maybe 10 years or more in official capacity, and then on and off more than that as a fan and an attendee.
I love that. That's wonderful. Of course, I am also very much interested in what you do for a career when it comes to being a international comics historian. So, what was your vision going into that? Like, can you talk a little bit about your history as no pun intended as an international comics historian?
I guess for a quick background, I started watching the 1966 Batman when I was 3. And you're gonna see a lot of similar themes, I think, in movements throughout my life. I started from there, and then from there, I fell in love in a particular episode when Batman outsmarts basically their version Mr. Freeze, their version of it, because he had bat thermal undies on, and
Hmm.
I felt that he was the smartest character I have ever met. I told my mom, and my mom is an educator. She's actually a teacher. And she had said, Batman's actually not originally a television show character. He's actually a comic book character. And she takes a lot of proactive steps to take me to the library. So I love the library even. Like she started taking me when I was like 1 or 2, and she would read to me. So she used the opportunity to take me to the library to check out and look at comics and go to local comic book stores because to her, reading is reading. Like
Mm,
there's still text, there's still words on there. So from there, I kind of fell in love with comics and I started exploring a lot of it. I figured out what Moomins were. Judge Dredd, Image Comics came out in the 90s, Dark Horse, Marvel, obviously. So I started reading and collecting a lot of that. Then I went to college and I was able to, there's a comic studies program there and like a cartoon research library that was able to do an academic background in it. And then
mm,
when I finished school, I actually went in for veterinary, but I
mhm.
also did marketing PR. I was in school for a long time because I was also pursuing multiple degrees, and one of them was also comic studies. I
Mm-hmm.
got out of that, and then I went into public speaking because I noticed there's a lot of conventions when I moved back home to Los Angeles. And through a lot of conventions, they needed a lot of panels and programming. So I would speak to the head of programming, and they were like, well, we always have a lot of writers and artists from various backgrounds and mediums, comics included, but we don't have a moderator or public speaker that understands the industry, but doesn't do that particular job. Because then the moderator could show bias. Like if you're a penciler, you might ask the penciler on the panel more questions than you would ask the writer or the colorist or the letterer. So I would submit ideas that kind of gelled with what the head of programming was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So it merged public speaking along with comic studies and history because I understood it from a broad perspective and was able to also ask questions in a more diverse panel if it's like one from each particular career background to kind of spread out the questions and the answers a lot more evenly. So I kind of got into that. And from there, I do a lot of press and interviews because you do also have to prove in written or video format that you know the background that you're talking about. Because when you're asking, let's say Vince Hernandez, he works over at Aspen, he was one of my first people that I interviewed, so he has a very fond memory and place in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to figure out very quickly if you're interviewing him that you don't know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you really have to understand the studies of it and the history of it, and then go into it knowing exactly what you're talking about. And then from there, it kind of grew into public speaking around seminars, universities, conventions, also internationally. And then I was chosen to be the Eisners is basically the Oscars equivalent of comics. And I was one of the judges a few years back because they saw kind of, I've been doing it for more than 10, 15 years, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get enough accreditation, and people felt that I obviously knew what I was talking about and what I was studying. And from there, I was one of the judges, which is one of the highest, I wouldn't say the, but one of the highest things that you could achieve is either your work is nominated for an Eisner and won an Eisner, or you were one of the judges. And there's also other really prestigious awards
Mm-hmm.
around the world as well. But that is definitely one of them here. So it's definitely over time, you're writing a lot of uh, articles, journalism, you are interviewing, doing press, you're public speaking, because you can't really mess up public speaking. Someone's going to know that you don't know what you're talking about. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
not studied the background of it. So from over there, it was able, and because I really feel that comics medium should not just be focused to westernized, which is like in the large part superhero, but there are other topics and genres. I really also try to broaden the scope and bring a passion to United Kingdom, Franco-Belgium comics, Australian, obviously manga. And
Mm-hmm.
there's like manhwa and manhwa, which is like Korea and China. And
Mm-hmm.
it's such an extensive history that I feel like sometimes we're so Western focused that we kind of lose
Yeah.
perspective of what's outside. And I
Yeah.
also want to bring that. They know everything about Superman and Batman, but we may not know what they have, right? Like Moomins or Judge
Right.
Dredd or Dylan Dog, or they're lesser known characters to us, but is very important to them. So that's kind of a unintentionally long story of
No,
how
I
I
thought
got into it. I'm so sorry.
no, that was absolutely wonderful. Like, it actually allows me to transition into talking about some of your notable presentations that you've delivered. And in some of the history that I've noticed of your presentations, you've worked really hard to draw awareness to, the comics and the characters and the creations from, especially marginalized communities, but also like underrepresented creators who also are involved in these different mediums, right? The Native American representation in comics and pop culture with Taboo presentation was absolutely wonderful. My background is partially in Native American literature, So like I really was nerding out about that. I read about your Forgotten Trio panel where you drew awareness to colorists, inkers, and letterers, and how they tend to often be overlooked and glossed over. And knowing that you have this passion for drawing awareness to what so many people, especially privileged people who love the media but don't really often see like these aspects, I think that's important. I think that's significant.
I was gonna say you're one of my favorite interviewers already
Oh,
because you've done such extensive research. I was like, oh my gosh, nobody ever looks into it.
well, I think, I do feel like that both of us are seasoned when it comes to researching because we
Right.
do love doing what we do. And going back to what you were saying, like, where you mentioned that, like, people will notice kind of the vacancies or when you've not really done the research. I like being in that position before, like it's kind of horrifying to be in that position, right? And of course you can only do what time permits and what bandwidth permits, but like I think it does justice for the individual that you're speaking with in a way, and I'm glad that I'm glad that we really connect on that. Another really cool thing that I found was that you were part of the group or some of the minds behind the Haruo Nakajima Action Actor Scholarship, which
Yes, yes.
I did not know that. I thought that was so cool.
It's the only official scholarship because we do have Sonoe Nakajima-san's permission, which
Hmm.
is you have to speak with her to get her permission, which was a huge honor. And I was the one that was able to facilitate that between TJ Storm, who plays Legendary's Godzilla, and he
Hmm.
owns his own school, like mocap action school, but also with Sonoe Nakajima. So when he and I had spoke about it, it was his idea, but I was able to facilitate a much more smooth transition because you also need a translator. You
Hmm.
also need somebody who explains to her the ideas so she's not blindsided or it's like, why is a Hollywood actor just, the industry is not always forthright and honest, but they've
Right.
already met before and they love each other. So I was able to kind of be one of the main people behind it, but it is TJ Storm's school and it is his scholarship that comes out of, basically his own pocket that he picks about 3 to 4 every year. And we always announce it the day of his birthday, Haruo
Hmm.
Nakajima-san's birthday, because it's also
Mm.
the start of the year, right? It's a perfect timing. And they met and they get along so well and they love each other. So I'm so happy to be part of something to kind of transition and make that happen.
That's so wonderful, and what a way to celebrate the legacy, right? Like that
Thank you.
just
Yeah.
it celebrates the artists, it celebrates the legacy, and I think that that is what builds community ultimately too.
Yes, yes, and doing a lot of publicity work for it because you want the art of it to continue in whatever modern technology it can be. But
Hmm.
also when the scholarship students are chosen, they record their thank you video in English, but
Hmm.
I make sure I have it translated so when it gets to her, she knows what they're saying. I
Hmm.
feel so bad if she was to look at these beautiful faces of students, but she doesn't know what they're saying. But it's
That's
been going
totally
on
fair.
about 2, 3 years now, and she's been very touched, I believe, by the results.
That's amazing. I love that so much. So, I one other thing that I wanted to discuss before we actually really deep
It's
dive into you
okay.
being a Godzilla fan. I'm just nerding out, forgive me. So you also are the co-host of the Kaiju Kingdom podcast,
I
which like is such a prolific, influential podcast. I know this is going to be a little nerd moment of mine, but long ago when I was putting together Growing Up with Godzilla, I looked at Kaiju Kingdom as kind of inspiration as an example as well. So I really feel like that podcast has really created such a positive, influence in our fandom to inspire people. How did that begin for you?
My co-host is Chris Eaton. He is also the beautiful soul that basically keeps all of our social media alive because we've dividend our work out in the way that he understood I have other life priorities and workload, and vice
Mm.
versa. He's got a lot going on, and we all have strengths in different areas. But he is my co-host, and I think it was more than 10 years ago. We did press, so we're always in the press line together.
Mhm.
And I noticed that he loved Godzilla, and I also love Godzilla, and we love kaiju film. One of the things that really drew me to this idea was twofold. One, growing up, I didn't really have a lot of friends to talk about Godzilla with. So I was always very excited to find somebody. And two, when you're at a press line and it's like a red carpet, sometimes other journalists are very, I would say, stingy with their space. And they also
Mm.
push you forward and back because their cameras have huge tripods, and then they try to hog up a particular actor's time much longer. So by the time they go down to your camera, you don't have as much time to interview because the
Mhm.
publicist needs to keep everybody rolling. I noticed Chris was not like that. We didn't work for the same outlet, but he would always say to other people or to me, no, we have room. Why don't you move your camera here? Or like, you know what? Why don't you go ahead? We'll take this actor and then you take that actor and then we'll switch off. Or if something happens, he would volunteer to help. So I noticed he was different from
Mhm.
other journalists in the fact that he was a lot more open with certain things. He doesn't let, a-hole things fly, but
Mhm.
he would say something, but he also wouldn't just take up a person's space and then like push their camera. There's just a lot going on. And I
Mhm.
noticed he liked Godzilla. So I figured he not only had the personality trait of people that I like, I'm more drawn to, but also the knowledge of knowing Godzilla and kaiju films and the temperament to do it. Because I've heard him interview people
Mm.
because you can hear them while you're waiting for your next talent.
Mhm.
And so I actually came up to him and I was like, "Oh, do you have time to meet up at a volcano like near my home to talk about like I would like to do a Godzilla podcast together. I have all of these ideas." And he said, "Sure." And then we met up shortly after and we went down all of our goals about how we would want our podcast to be, the goals that we would want to reach, where we saw our future. This is like besides monetizing, right? That's always the
Right.
hope for everyone, but there's certain guests that you want to get, there's certain milestones you want to reach. um, all the meanwhile, from his point of view, I think when he tells a story, he's always very surprised because he's like, then I see this tiny person yelling, "Hey Chris, do you want to do a podcast like his point of view is so different. But also one of my dogs, Teddy, was still alive at the time, and he says, "I remember you're so passionate talking about this podcast in our future." And I would look down and see little black soulless eyes from your dog. Uh, so,
That's so wholesome.
and then, like he says it, but that's how we kind of started because we really vibed very well together. And I'm very big on the fact that I wanted to have an outlet and to have friends to talk with this with.
Mhm.
But also, I'm very big on that. If I don't like your temperament, I don't want to do something with you. And
Right.
I happen to really like his character and temperament, and we were able to do this together. So the podcast actually would not exist, I think, without him, because over the years, I don't think I've really, maybe one or two people, but they don't live nearby. I haven't really been able to find anybody else I would have wanted to partner up with in the future, or in the
Right.
past.
No, that history is wonderful, and I think that it is about creating a rapport, right? It is about, networking and making those connections with people who you know will uplift you as you work on a creative project collaboratively. uh, that's something that I've kind of kept in mind doing this as well. It's for the last 10 to 15 years. Like you always want to work with people who will be supportive, who you kind of mesh with well, and just know that you two have done some wonderful work via Kaiju Kingdom. So I
Thank
celebrate
you.
that.
Thank you. And he is uplifting in the terms of he has the mindset of he's just grateful that we have anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if he doesn't like something, then he just moves on. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
dwell on not liking it. For example, really quickly, 1998 Godzilla, we all know. He's like, you know what? If you like it, great. And if you don't like it, then it's not for you. And then he moves on. So he's very happy. He goes, better to have something than nothing at all. And he understands
Yeah.
his difference. for everyone. And I rather have that perspective than the
Hmm.
more negative things that we may actually see that's out there.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. So, obviously, we're here to also celebrate your history as a Godzilla fan, right?
Right.
I really want you to explain how you were first introduced to Godzilla. Like, what was your entry point? How did it all begin?
I know earlier I mentioned I was watching the 1966 Adam West Batman.
Hmm.
I was born and raised in America, but I mostly spoke Mandarin Chinese at home, Mandarin
Hmm.
at home. My mom wanted me to know and learn English before I entered kindergarten. So after Sesame Street, around 2 to 3 years old, I was allowed the freedom of the remote control, which may or may not have been in her favor with her looking back. And I would flip around channels. So after Lamb Chop, right, Mr. Rogers,
Oh,
Sesame
yeah.
Street, I would flip around. I came across Batman first, and I also loved a dinosaur. So I had a lot of dinosaur picture books from the library, because my mother would read them to me.
Hmm.
And then I came across a very fat, chubby, upright dinosaur that kind of looked like a T Rex, and he was wrecking havoc through various villages and telephone poles and electric poles. And when you're a child, sometimes you put your toys and towers together and then you kind of stomp through them. At
Hmm.
least I know I did, right? Like
Oh,
a
I
little,
totally did.
yeah, the struck. And then, your parents are like, please put your toys away, don't step on them. But at that moment, I looked and I'd go, that's a chubby dinosaur who's doing exactly what I've always wanted, which was total annihilation and destruction of toys and everything around me. I don't know what this is. It is amazing. I also don't know what's going on because it's not in color. So are my eyes going out? I have like no I have no idea. I was 3 years old. This was after Batman. I don't know what was going on. I was so excited. I ran to go tell my parents. My parents came over and they told me it was Godzilla, and that is a
Uh,
Japanese film franchise. And they were like, he's not, because see, my parents knew less about that character. They just know that it's Japanese, in background, that it started from Japan. And my
hmm.
dad was like, look, I don't know where he comes from. I don't know if he's a dinosaur. I don't know what happened to him, but his name is Godzilla, and he goes through town to town and he wrecks stuff. And that's as far as I know. And from
As a
there,
3-year-old, maybe that's the only description you needed, right?
I know when I was 3, I was like, I'm in love. He's amazing. He's amazing. And now I'm Godzilla. So that's kind of how it started. And I just kind of fell in love because I loved animals, and I went to the zoo a lot, and I love dinosaurs. I loved all the kaiju, right? And I love dragons, King Ghidorah, right?
Mm,
Dragons, everything. So to me, I was much more compelled by the kaijus because
hmm.
they were a little bit more appealing to me than the human characters, which I grew to appreciate over time. But you're older, right?
Right,
Like you
yeah.
get older and you learn to appreciate it. But at that time, a little bit more simplistic when you're 3 years old, you're going to like the creatures more, the kaijus more.
Absolutely. I will never forget being so obsessed with Godzilla. Like, of course, there's like the dinosaur to Godzilla pipeline, right? But like, I will never forget the moment I stumbled across Mothra. Some chemical reaction happened in my queer little brain back then where I was just like, beautiful moth creature versus terrifying dinosaur creature. This
Yeah.
is perfection. Like, perfection.
Yes, yes. I remember when I first saw Mothra, I was like, okay, it's called Mothra. It's got the word moth in it, but I was screaming, "Mommy, giant butterfly!"
Essentially,
I was
yeah.
freaking out because I ooh, I could not tell when you're a child between fantasy and reality, but
Hmm.
because I knew dinosaurs were extinct, I thought that these creatures still existed in our modern world, in our
Hmm.
current world. So I thought they were like real life prehistoric creatures that existed,
Oh.
but I'm like 3, and my mom is like, this is a movie. Also, it says Mothra. Why are you screaming butterfly? She was an educator, ever an educator.
The
Yeah.
queen of practicality.
Yes, she is.
I love that. No, like I often think back on just how active our imaginations are as kids. And I just remember sitting and just staring at my toys and just imagining up these stories and scenarios and things like that. And
Uh-huh.
I like part of me wonders if that could be one of the reasons why we went into the fields that we've gone into as well, because like as an educator, as a historian, like we're still very much enmeshed in the media. We're still very much connected with these characters that we love. And I think that that's our way of honoring that imagination, still retaining the imagination in some degree, right? But also using it as a means to create a sense of, awareness for other people that, like, hey, you can celebrate these things no matter what age you are,
Yeah.
right? That's one of the reasons I created the show, because I was so tired of people being like, you're in your mid 30s and you're still going on and on about Godzilla. And I'm like, yes,
No,
I
it keeps
am.
the inner child alive because you need to find passion and joy in the little things or big things, however you want to see it,
Yeah,
because reality is going to be all around. It's going to be a downer sometimes. So you want to have
absolutely.
something optimistic or something that could give you
Right.
a way to solve your problems or feel reflected.
Yeah. And yeah, these stories create representation. These stories help us understand our role in the world with other people. Like, even if it's like about, a giant mutated creature, right?
Yeah.
Like it can really do wonders in helping us feel a sense of self-actualization. So I went off on a tangent. Anyway,
No.
um, so okay, so you were 3 years old when you were first introduced to Godzilla. Like, as you grew into the teenage years, so on and so forth, and even into adulthood, how did your love of Godzilla, your engagement in the fandom, grow or shift at that time?
I would say my love for it was always childlike
Hmm.
up until maybe later into adulthood. It kind of got me to understand, I guess, two things is because I knew it was not from America. It gave me one of the many gateways into studying why such a character was created in Japan. And
Right.
that's when you learn to appreciate more about why they did it, the metaphors that they were trying to tell you, their symbolism, what the
Hmm.
human characters actually meant and represented. It also gave me the first sense of, as I get older, much like Batman and Doctor Who, there are different iterations of every character. Same character, similar foundation, but different iterations and versions, and that no one is right or wrong over the other as long as maybe some core foundations remain the same,
Hmm.
and that each one is a different starting point for various people. And I think it's very important for people to kind of see that there's no right Godzilla to like, whether it's the Showa era, the Heisei era, Millennium, Legendary, because it helped me gain a better understanding of how other people got into it. Because unlike the simplistic of just dinosaurs, my love of it also grew because I realized a lot of it is a bonding with their parent or with a
Hmm.
sibling when
Yeah.
people, and then it helps me to get to know people as who they are as people, but also understand outside of that on a separate note a lot about Japanese culture and society, how they view things, because their films are different from the way we make Godzilla films. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a reason behind that. It's not just random and willy-nilly because it's fun. They have their
Right.
own reasoning of why they do that. And you actually learn more about the history and the lore of the people over there and why they do the things that they did.
Hmm.
And I find that that kind of grows and shifts and molds and expands as there are more and more Godzilla films and things across other mediums, whether it's video games, comic books, novels, but also as we get more even merchandise and other things, it helps you
Hmm.
to better, I think, understand, even business wise,
Mm.
Like, people will say, oh, how come there's no more Bandai? Or I don't understand why Legendary doesn't have more of Rodan or whatever. And when you look into it, you find out it's a licensing, it's a
Mm.
copyright, it's a money issue. How the way they do business is different than the way we do business. It is endless. Like, you learn so much about business and marketing and PR just from that alone. And there are just so many facets that also just tie back to the franchise.
Ooh, I loved that. It's absolutely it's so true. And I think that once people start unpacking those different layers, like I feel like we also not only develop a stronger understanding of the community as a whole that's celebrating the character, but we also begin to understand like just what Godzilla does for each individual, right? And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes too, because I'm really excited to pick at like how Godzilla has shaped you into who you are. Before we get there though, over the years, this is just shameless like knowledge that I must have. Which Godzilla films would you say are your favorites and why?
Okay. I really, obviously the original, 1954. Godzilla minus one,
Mm,
for all the reasons that we won't have time to get into. It basically is the same reasons everybody has. Godzilla minus one. Shin Godzilla, I did like because he was like a disco ball. He had
mm.
powers that were just unknown, like every other version
The
of him.
best way of
I
describing him I've
called him
ever heard.
I called him Disco Ball Godzilla, and he also kind of looks, he's so grotesque that it's interesting, like so ugly you can't look away. It's almost how some people feel about certain breeds of dogs that I will not
Hmm.
shame and name, but
Fair.
I like Dogpool from the new Deadpool Wolverine movie. It's not a
Mm.
spoiler, you've seen it in all the trailers. They're
Hmm.
just something, so he looks like a rotten avocado mixed with Godzilla. I don't know what's happening. Um, he's just too ugly and beautiful. I can't look away, and his powers is like a disco ball. But to go back a little bit further, Mecha Godzilla, Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla,
Mm.
1974.
That was my first Godzilla movie.
Oh, it was actually because common theme, Hardak from Batman the Animated Series.
Hmm.
I saw that episodes first. So there's a
Hmm.
part where Bruce Wayne ends up losing part of the skin of his face, and then you find out it's the Hardak programming underneath. As a child, I'm shocked. I'm like, I did not see that coming. He is a cyborg android. When you're older, you obviously rewatch the series, I did not see that coming as a child with Mecha Godzilla. So when part of the skin comes off and you realize it's mech underneath, I'm like, holy schmolies, I did not see that coming. It was so visceral to me that it really stayed with me because it surprised and shocked me. Much like, Luke, I am your father. When you're older,
Right.
you realize he has been, right? But at that time, you're so shocked, so it creates a core memory. Another
Hmm.
one is Godzilla versus Violente,
Uh,
89.
love that
Again,
movie.
it's one of the few female kaijus, but
Hmm.
also as a beautiful rose. And then in her final form, I was like, Violente is someone Poison Ivy would make. Pamela Isley from again, right? It goes back, my common theme.
Hmm.
I was like, those two women are friends. Like in my
Hmm.
head canon as a child, they are buddies. But Pamela would have created Violente. Obviously, watching the movie, we know she didn't. But those are really core memories to me and some of my favorite movies
Hmm.
for various reasons, whether it's a deeper political meaning or whether it is just something I enjoyed watching and really reminded me of other, genres and comics and pop culture that I really love.
I am nerding out right now. No, like so Godzilla vs. Biollante is one of my favorites as well for very similar reasons. And I just think like aesthetically, like that film, it is just such a contrast to other
Yes.
Godzilla films that I know at the time, and I've mentioned this on the show before, I know at the time that it kind of was considered a commercial failure, right? But now looking back on it what, 30 years later, it's kind of become like it has like a pop cultural following. Like people love Godzilla versus Biollante a lot for
Yes.
all of those reasons mentioned. So, well, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about particular favorite kaiju or human characters that you've been drawn to over the years. So which of those have really stood out to you?
I like a lot of the different human characters, but I'm actually much more drawn to the kaijus
Mm,
and the kaiju. I was gonna say the monsters, but the kaijus. When I was younger, obviously Godzilla, because I saw myself as a little kid as him, just kind of stomping through. But as you
mm,
grow older, I see it more from like an outsider perspective about how I would say personality, honestly, or how
yeah.
he's depicted has changed throughout the series and the different eras and that he's been, whether it's legendary, Showa, millennium, the millennium.
Hmm.
I love the fact that sometimes he is like your buddy, a
Mm,
great Godzilla dad. And I love the fact that currently Godzilla has a job in the legendary universe. Starting with Monarch's Kurt Russell, and then you actually find out Godzilla has a job. And I love the fact that he reminds me again so much of like Punch First, Ask Questions Later. Like he looks so
hmm.
tired. He has so much personality in the later legendary films. He's just like, here I am, just doing my
Just a
job,
humgrum dad doing what he
getting
needs to
up,
do.
and like in New Empire, he's like, get off my lawn, right near the pyramids. He's just this upset, like angry, old grumpy man, like Punch First, Ask Questions. Like you see King Kong being like, no, I have something to say. He's like, dang it, like the older
Uh,
version of me feels that. Um, um,
that whole scene, like, and then Mothra arriving and being like,
it's
listen,
like, stop.
all three of them had so much personality in
Yeah,
that sequence. I was just
yeah.
like, this is beautiful. Like,
The trinity of them, they were my superhero trinity. They were Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, all in
mm,
three. That was the three of them for me. Uh, I liked King Ghidorah because I love dragons,
hmm,
whether they are Asian nature or Western nature, and he's this beautiful golden dragon. I love Ibraya because I
mm,
just like crustaceans. Some of it I'm drawn to because of their aesthetic appeal, and plus Ibraya is like a laughing stock. So that giant
yeah,
lobster comes out of the ocean, screams, and goes back in. However, I feel
relatable.
like it's the underdog. I feel for him, just like Megalon, there's so many of it. I'm less you asked me which ones I'm more drawn to, and definitely those are the ones, but less drawn to like people love Jet Jaguar, but he's a little bit too humanoid for me.
Hmm. Yeah.
However, and like King Caesar, but I really do enjoy like those are some of my favorites. There's so many of them, but I'm more drawn in terms of how they grew his
Mm,
personality a lot more would have to be Godzilla. So I'm not really as I know you asked me which ones like human characters or kaijus I connect a little bit more. I don't I guess as a disclaimer, I don't really connect with too many of the people or the humans. I like them.
hmm.
However, I do prefer much more of the kaijus. Like I said, as a little girl, I saw myself as Godzilla and then grew out of that and saw it as a third person perspective. But Godzilla would because he's so flexible and his versatility of his personality over the years. And obviously King Ghidorah and in a lesser extent Ibraya, Amanda, all these other
Hmm.
ones that I like for aesthetic appeal, but as they are shown only in a certain way through the films, I would say the main character that we get to see a lot more is obviously Godzilla himself. I will also add human characters that I surprisingly did love is Trapper, played
Mm.
by Downton Abbey's Dan Stevens, or Beauty and the Beast, if you want to talk about that film, because he could have easily have been kind of an annoying character, but
Right.
he actually wrote him really well,
They did.
and he didn't try to take over, Rebecca Hall's character, Eileen
Mhm.
Andrews, Dr. Eileen Andrews. Instead, he understood where he wasn't really the back seat, but was her support. But also, they had really good chemistry. And I don't know, I mean, they alluded to their college days, but at that current time, it would be a platonic friendship.
Right.
And they were always very appropriate, and he respected her leadership, and he was good at what he does. I don't really like characters who are there for the comedic relief, but they're also not good at their job. He's also
Right.
very good at his job and very compassionate to, the other characters when they were going through things.
I was very impressed by that character because going into it, I also, because I've gotten really exhausted of kind of the needless comic relief that we see in a lot of media these days, I found that, like you were saying, like the purpose behind that character and the character's motivations were very clear from the get-go. So I think that's what kind of made me really just fall
Yeah.
in love with him. So no, I think that's a great selection. I think that is a wonderful selection. Here's the big question.
Okay.
Here's the big question. How has Godzilla shaped you into who you are today?
Ooh, I think more than anything, being proactive in making people feel welcome.
Mm,
Because I had said earlier with the podcast and how I've started with Chris Eaton, I didn't really have a lot of people to talk to about it. I maybe only had one other friend in sixth grade. And at that time, I printed out, the days of AOL.
oh,
And like
love those
inking.
days.
I printed out so many pictures of Godzilla and all the kaijus and like Rodan and Mothra. I put each one into a plastic sleeve, into a binder, brought it to school, and then during recess was like, "Hey, I won't say his name. He knows exactly who he is." And I would flip through and talk about it, but then I quickly realized even I've exhausted him. And after a couple times in
Oh,
recess, he started like being like, "Oh, I want to talk about like other stuff," because I only had one friend, so I had to unload on that one person. The only other person I can talk to about is my mom, right?
mhm.
And she listens because she loves me, but she doesn't know the lore and the story,
Right, yeah.
as much. She's practical, and she's like, "How is he king of the monsters when he doesn't fly?"
Oh,
And she was like, "King Ghidorah flies?" She said the same thing about Captain America in Avengers. She's like, "How is he the leader when he can't fly?" I guess flying is like the ultimate extra superpower that she just has to have.
your mom is so funny.
You're like, how is this happening? But I only have so many people to talk to. And I'm just like, "Mom, you don't get it. He's amazing because he has atomic breath and he's great and his spikes glow." And she, like she's like, "Okay, yeah." Like she's excited because I'm excited, but she doesn't really understand it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there is like at the time, we weren't as connected because we didn't have technology. I know that there were women and girls that were into Godzilla, but we
Mhm.
don't know each other as well at the time because technology was not as advanced. Now I can find a female friend in Germany if I wanted, right? If I could
Mhm.
like search out, but at that time, you felt very alone and you felt
Yes.
very by yourself. And I find that I wanted to create an atmosphere where not only is, children and adults welcome, but also women and those who
Yeah.
identify as, women could come together and really love and talk about Godzilla and all the kaijus, Mothra, you know, King Caesar, Manda, everything, every character without really any shame of saying this is a boys' club
Right.
when it's technically just large prehistoric creatures. If you want to simplify it, those have no gender specificity of like what you can like who can like them. And my
Right.
mom was very big on like, who told you you can't like Batman because you're a girl? Like, she's very much, she goes, you can like whatever you want. She's very big on like, this is America. It's the American dream. You can be president
Mm.
and you can like Batman. She was very big. And that kind of carries over into Godzilla and realizing I didn't have a lot of other people to talk to about it, like boys or girls. Like I didn't have anybody. And so I wanted to create an atmosphere that was, again, welcoming for everyone, but also to subdivide into another little, group, women and those who identify as women, because we're
Mm.
also not a monolith.
Yes.
We don't all love Mothra. I
Mm-hmm.
have friends, I have girlfriends, we discuss about it in a civil manner because we also want a healthy environment, and it helps me to understand where people come from. Some women
Yes.
love the noble sacrifice, and some women are tired of the why are she always dying for
Yeah.
the male character? Like, is that her only purpose? And it's
Mm-hmm.
great. We actually have really civil discussions. And also on that note, finding out why people love the entire kaiju genre. We have those that are on the spectrum, and
Mm.
they love it for different reasons than we would think,
Absolutely.
because they see the characters differently, maybe in ways that we don't even see it. So in a way, it helps me to also better understand friends and new friends that are on the spectrum, and also why they love Godzilla and why they love
I
the universe that he's in. So more than
yeah.
anything, it helps me to get to know people.
I 100% resonate with that. I mean, looking back at the conversations I've had on this show, like whether it be conversations about neurodiversity, about being LGBTQ plus,
Yes.
like about being a woman. There's so many different vantage points and takeaways that people have had,
Yeah.
and I think that if people are willing to listen to those stories, then they are willing to realize that part of Godzilla's versatility is in what we take away from the character, or in how we give back to the character through participating in community or through art, fan fiction, all sorts of different things. No, I think that we always need more of that.
Yeah. And I joke with people in a way because I know there's controversy around the month of June for Pride
Hmm.
Month and Godzilla, and even other months,
Yeah,
and less so. And my way of seeing it is Godzilla does not discriminate. He will stomp on you no matter who you are. So you might
absolutely.
as well fall in love with the character.
No, it's so funny
He doesn't
because
care about you. He's just walking through the city like he's doing his thing.
right,
Why are
right.
you putting, like, I feel like in a way, and that's more of a humor tone to it, but in all seriousness, anybody should love the character. Anyone should be
Uh,
allowed to love the character. And I think if the character could speak and emote, I think it would go the other way as well.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned Pride Month because I feel like every Pride Month I have that conversation where like people are like, why are you like you talk about being queer and loving Godzilla, like why does that matter? And I'm like, because Godzilla helped me survive at a very vulnerable time in my life when I was finding that sense of self, right? So like
Right.
obviously that is the connective point. And I think once people begin to see that that's what Godzilla has done for people, then they start realizing, oh, it's bigger than I'm thinking. Like it's like this is on a grander scale than really what I'm considering what people are taking away, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So no, I think that was very well put. I do have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
So obviously, like we would be neglectful if we did not talk about collecting. So do you like collecting any Godzilla memorabilia?
I do. I do. I know that my collection is, while not intimate, is also not as extensive as some I've seen out there.
Same
I,
here.
and I think it's for various reasons. One, I love Batman, Doctor Who, Care Bears. There's only limited time and resources and space for everything, and I kind of have to spread out and pick and choose. But also, I am a proud child of immigrants, and
Mhm.
they're very frugal with money. They are not going to buy you Godzilla toys or Batman toys or whatever. You will make it out of Play-Doh yourself, my friend. So
Mhm.
I didn't have a lot growing up in terms of collecting, because I know some people have wonderful, cherished memories from, like, my father was, when I was 6, my father bought me this, something. I didn't really have that. So I felt I was a little bit behind for many years.
Mhm.
I wasn't able to grab it until I had adult money,
Mhm.
and able to buy from there. So I do have a kaiju collection because it also goes to Gamera. and any like Pulgasari, any kaiju out there that I really feel drawn to and love, and or I love the aesthetic of how it's done, then
Mhm.
yes, I would try to acquire it. I'm not really somebody when it comes to figures and toys, like you have to have every version of it. I can pick and choose the ones that I particularly like. You know, if they're
Mhm.
flocked or metallic, or this one glows in the dark, it's a cherry version. But I understand, more power for those who can get all of the ones that they want within, because that's like a completionist, right? The
Right.
collector in you is a completionist. And I understand that because I do that with comics. However, I also know with Godzilla, I do as much as I can because I also love Voltron as seen above my head. And a lot.
Do I
And
see a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles logo down there too?
this is a vinyl record that looks like a pizza when it comes out.
I am obsessed. I used to love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles so much, but no, like I think like dividing the energy up around like the different franchises that you love, like that's so valid. I know for me, it's Godzilla, Pokemon, Star Trek. Like I really have to kind of like divide up my. I just
Yes.
bought myself a. I love the Lord of the Rings as well. I have a Hobbit hole
Oh, that's
wax
so cute.
warmer.
I do see. That's so
And purely an impulse buy, I was like, "Do I need this?" And my fiance looked at me, he's like, "You need that." And I'm like, "All
See, you
right."
have someone that supports you. The
I,
support and
but who's
understand.
also not afraid to rein me in when I need to be reined in, because I think
Right.
that, I mean, I have a decent sense of practicality, but sometimes on a whim I can be like, "Do I need that Sofubi Mothra thing? Not yet. Maybe later." Um, Jessica, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I have one final question for you.
Sure.
Do you have any advice for Godzilla fans who may be new to the franchise?
If you feel alone and there's a particular, because we are public figures, podcasters,
Mm-hmm.
Donny is one. Chris Eaton, my co-host, is another. If you want to reach out to me, if you reach out to Kaiju United's Jacob Lingle,
Mm,
Elijah Thomas, like people that you feel, I understand if you haven't met us, you have to only get the vibe that you meet offline. I mean,
right.
online, excuse me. But you want to reach out and meet with people that you feel won't be a-holes. There might be children watching, so I'm going to watch my language. That you
I'm okay with swearing.
feel like, hey, I'm new to Godzilla. I love Kaiju United. I love Growing Up with Godzilla. You know, depending on, I've had people say, can we be friends? And others will be like, what do you like? You know, what do you think I can get into? You know, we're going to do our best with our time and energy and bandwidth to get back to you and give like fun suggestions. And we would love to meet up with you if we ever can, you know, because I feel like more than anything, you want to have a buddy, you want to have a friend. And if you don't know where to start, I really believe that because Godzilla, much like knowing Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered in an alley, a lot of its origin and background is pretty self explanatory at this point because it's been, you know, 70 years.
Hmm.
Anywhere to start is great. And I wouldn't allow anybody to tell you where you cannot start at, because I feel
Ooh,
like that's not, because then immediately you're on defense or you feel kind
right.
of discouraged and you don't want to continue. Anywhere you want to start is great. You can start with an Oscar award winning one, or you can start with Final Wars, which, you know, some people loved and some people didn't love. I personally loved it. And
Me
you
too.
can pretty much start, there's a trilogy anime series and there's Singular Point, both on Netflix. They're on various platforms. If you just want to start collecting because you think it's cute to look at, I'm trying to point up there, you can, because that can expand to movies. So I don't think there's a particular medium or format to start with. I think anywhere that makes you kind of excitable is great. I
Mm,
also do find online resources helpful. I know that Wikipedia can be edited by other people, but there's no shame in going down the Wikipedia rabbit hole or a
absolutely.
Wikizilla rabbit hole and joining groups. You know, I have Kaiju Ladies. It's a private group, if you want to join, or there are more broad ones. You know, there is like Kaiju United. There's like the collectors group. Most people are very nice because if you're not, the admins are getting better at kicking you out, or you can
Hmm.
freely leave. But most people will answer your question kindly, or been like, especially if you say, hi, I'm new to this, I love the energy, where can I buy Bandai's?
Hmm.
Will get you a much different answer than saying, where can I buy Bandai's? Because someone's going to be like, oh, you idiot, Amazon. Like they'll say something like that. But
Right.
people are actually quite forgiving and compassionate. I would like to believe and to encourage. I know that's not always the case. And I think anywhere really is kind of a great start. If you can't go to G Fest, you can't go to Comic Con, you can't go to, because I understand your local conventions, and
Mm.
to find meetup points to meet and talk with other people that you notice. If you're extroverted, hi, I like your Godzilla t-shirt. I just started myself. You don't want to linger too long because I guess people get that stranger danger situation, but
Hmm.
enough to kind of talk, because I meet friends waiting in line to get into other things. You find out you have things that you like. And if you're introverted, then maybe online groups, and being a frequent reader, first time commenter, might actually be a little bit better for you. And there's different ways and avenues. I think that's the great thing about conventions and also technology now, is that there's
Mm.
different ways of getting in and doing it. I think comics is also a great way. IDW has a lot
Absolutely.
of amazing Godzilla comics, and this year Godzilla, like Here Be Dragons, was
Hmm.
nominated for a few Eisners, and I never thought I would live to see a day where Godzilla comic was nominated for Eisners.
That's so
Um,
wonderful.
and that's a great place if you prefer to just sit quietly and read by yourself and not talk to anybody. That's
Hmm.
also a great way to start in.
Definitely. I think that's excellent advice. And like, I am like, I've read Godzilla comics for a long time, but like now that I've actually written in one, it's a very surreal, like, it's a very surreal experience for me. But like, I think that if you are a creator in the fandom as well, like, if you
Mhm.
want to really involve yourself in some way, like, start with fan fiction, start with
Yeah.
fan art, like, start with those entry points, because those are also ways I think you can make some really wholesome, good friends.
Yes.
And I always tell people I would not be a writer today had it not been for my love of Godzilla
Oh,
25 years ago, or a teacher today without those things. So I think these characters can really shape us in ways that we may not realize are huge, right?
yeah.
So, last but certainly not least, where can people find your stuff?
Okay. We are everywhere, except for I guess the Kaiju Kingdom on, I think, Instagram, either Instagram or Twitter. Like it gave us a username limitation. So we had to
Probably Twitter.
drop the podcast. But we are basically found everywhere on social media. Like us on Facebook. Chris and I are very active, but again, it's mostly Chris. I am a frequent reader and monitoring to make sure we don't have any like bad words or anything there.
Mhm.
But also on our Instagram, we are also on YouTube. And for our podcast, can also be found everywhere podcasts can be listened to, whether that's Amazon, Spotify, Apple, everything that's there. And Chris and I can always answer if you cannot find us or download us. You never have to pay for it. It's going to be free. You can also find me directly. I am on Instagram. I'm currently set on private. One day, when I'm more comfortable, I will go public. Hopefully soon. I can only do so many social medias at a time,
Mhm.
but I am old school. So I am on Facebook. I am the only one with my name. And when you Facebook friend me, please send me an inbox that says you heard me with Donny on Growing Up with Godzilla. So therefore, I can weed out randos that I just
Mhm.
don't know, or
Important though,
yes,
because there's
or
so many out there.
they may not be actual people. And I want to be able to be Facebook friends with you and be able to hear your stories. And if you want to reach out and say, hey, I'm new, I don't know anybody, or I thought I was the only woman in the Netherlands, that is into
Mhm.
Godzilla, then you have other women that you want to hang out with, then you're always more than welcome to.
I love that. Everyone, I will have links to Jessica's socials in the description section of the video. Plus, I will have a link to the Kaiju Kingdom podcast so you can go find that. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for all you do in this fandom, the community building that you do, the educating that you do. Like, it's so important. And I hope that you know that it's seen and celebrated by many.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been a long journey. We never thought we would get a consecutive continual panel at San Diego Comic-Con as one of them, and we were able to, and we met a lot of new friends that way. So I hope we're making a difference over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, don't forget, Growing Up with Godzilla premieres on the first and third Sunday of every month, as long as I have my poop together. And don't forget to click like, subscribe to the channel, all of that jazz. And last but certainly not least, don't forget to keep standing tall, my friends. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.